Tracy Dangerfield here of Be Empowered, and as part of our blog series for World Mental Health Day 2018, we're joined with Satveer. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us all about you?
So I'm Satveer Nijjar, and I deliver training around self-harm awareness under the business name Attention Seekers.
And so do you want to tell me a bit about what's inspired you to go down the work that you're in at the moment in your past?
Like so many people in this field, it's lived experience. So I suffered from mental ill health from, I'd say, the age of 12, but started seeking treatment at the age of 19. And from my experiences, both positive and negative, that really pushed me to drive forward to make change around mental health awareness, reduce stigma, and my history of self-harm led me to focus upon better understanding self-harm for professionals, parents, carers, because I think there's so much stigma around it, and also generally just destigmatising mental health, especially with the next generation, because there's a lot of fear around that.
Yeah. So what's your kind of ultimate goal? What are you trying to achieve with your training?
For me, the training's about improving confidence. I think that's a big one. Training for me isn't about teaching, it's about building confidence, improving confidence, and it's very satisfying when people walk away thinking, actually, I've been doing all right, because they've never been told whether they've been doing all right or not, and they've just been kind of winging it in a way, hoping, because that specialised training isn't available. But also around the language use, I'm very passionate about language use and mental health, and realising that when you're talking to someone, the words that you may be using may be detrimentally impacting upon them. So making people more conscious of that and how anybody can support someone with a mental health problem. You don't need to be a specialist and have specialist qualifications. Simply having a better understanding can reduce fear, build confidence, and thereby improve interaction.
So the term mental health, to you, what springs to mind? How would you describe what mental health means?
I think when I was ill, mental health meant being ill. But now over the years, mental health, as I now know and as I have learned, is we've all got mental health. It's just the other side to physical health, you have your mental health. So for me, it's about you as a person, your interactions with people, your emotional well-being. It's the other side to physical health problems, or your physical health, should I say. Then you have mental ill health. And I think there is that mixture between people going, oh, mental health means illness, when it doesn't. Mental health is a part of every single one of us.
Yeah, thank you. And thinking about mental health in a positive light, what would you say that, because I think as a culture we struggle to name things that we like or we love about ourselves, so what would you say is one thing that you really like or love about yourself?
I was dreading this question. Even though I do all these talks and stuff, I really do struggle, still to this day, about being positive, and I'll make a joke and I'll say it's my humour, but my daughter will go, you're not funny, but I am. So for me, what do I love about myself? I'm struggling now, but I think what I like about myself is that I'm approachable. That's something that people say. People have always said you're very approachable, and that makes it easy for people to disclose to me and feel able to talk to me about things that they might not be able to approach other people about because they think they might be shocked or judge them. So I think what I like about myself is my approachability.
Okay, so obviously this year the theme for World Mental Health Day is about youth and young people and their mental health. So what are your thoughts on the youth today and their mental health?
So now I've got my own child. She's a teenager, and I watch her going through, primary, secondary school, and now almost ready for university. And if I compared her life experiences and stresses to mine, of course they're going to be very different because we're a different generation. And I think today's youth are facing a very different set of problems to my generation and my mum's generation. But at the same time, they're their stresses and they're very real. And they also have the same stresses that I had, like relationships, getting older, navigating yourself through society, friendship issues, family breakdowns, issues within friendship groups, academic pressures. The crisis with young people, as it's being called, is a combination, in my opinion, of factors. One, yes, young people are under increasing pressure, in my opinion, and social media doesn't help. I don't think it's a primary cause of emotional distress. I think it's a major factor, though, because it's very difficult to switch off Whereas I know I had much more time to switch off when I was younger. So it's very consistent. It's very easy to be working late into the night, to be checking social media late into the night, and that in itself can bring about problems. We know with body image issues as well, that's hand in hand at times with social media. But then I also think we've got to give ourselves credits. Yes, there might be a massive increase in young people requiring support for mental health, but then so many more people have been trained up to signs of indicators in spotting mental ill health in young people, spotting the signs and symptoms. And that's from parents and professionals working with them. Going into schools, people like myself who go into schools and talk to young people about mental ill health, encourages people to seek support. So have we got a crisis in a really bad sense? Yes, because we don't have the service provision to support these young people. 300,000 young people seeking support for mental ill health, yet service availability has massively declined. There's not enough beds for acute admissions. Counselling lists can be anything from a few months to 18 months. So children, of course, are going to become increasingly distressed. What can we do? Of course, I'll say invest money, but that's not going to be an overnight solution. So the interim, and I do think it is difficult, especially for education staff. I think a lot of pressure is being put upon education staff to be trained up around mental health. But I think it's very beneficial, because once people's confidence has grown in that area, whether you're a teacher or a youth club mentor, you're a parent, if you have some knowledge, then it can help reduce the anxiety in the home if a child is struggling. And you can find that actually you can support them in that interim period if they do require further support. Or if we're able to pick up on signs and we can speak to the child about it, they may not even need further support. Not every child will need, a referral to CAMS. Not every child will need therapy. But if people feel under-equipped in managing signs and symptoms of distress, they feel their only option is to give them therapy. But if we feel more equipped and knowledgeable about things that can cause distress and have tools that we can take home and go, okay, try this or try that. But if you think, I've got nothing to try because I've never been in this situation, I don't know how to manage it, I think that's where the fear comes. Referrals go up, then we get these headlines. But there definitely is a crisis in regards to the funding and service provision.
So yes, we've acknowledged that there is a crisis for youth mental health, and there's some really good pointers that you made there as to why and maybe what we need to be doing to support young people of today. And obviously your expertise is in, and your training, you focus on self-harming in particular. So could you tell me a bit more about self-harming behaviours maybe? And I know that I think self-harming rates are at the highest in Europe at the moment. And I think the UK is at the highest in Europe in terms of self-harming behaviours. What are your views on that?
So people have often asked, why do you specialise in self-harm awareness, Satveer? Do you even get work? Sadly, I'm very busy. I never thought I could make a career out of delivering very specific training course here. And the reason I focused upon it was because, yes, mental health awareness is vitally important, and everybody, in my opinion, no matter who you are, should have a basic level of mental health understanding. But in certain areas, especially like in schools, increasing numbers of people are coming forward and saying, yeah, but we want that extra support around self-harm. We're coming across it, we don't know how to manage it. In regards to it being the highest rate in Europe, I am aware of the statistic that was saying, highest rate or top 5 in Europe. And again, I think it's how you look at it. There's two ends to a coin. And I think on one side, you can say, oh gosh, these young people, because it's often associated with young people, these young people are having these mental health crises, thereby turning towards self-harm, the UK's got a problem. Or again, we could look at, we're talking about mental health much more openly. We're training people up, people are becoming more aware of signs and indicators, young people are feeling more comfortable to seek support and thereby disclosing behaviours. So that's why there could be such a high rate of self-harm in the UK.
Could you give us a kind of an overview of what you would say self-harming is, and sort of maybe the common myths around self-harming?
Yeah, we use the phrase self-harm all the time. It gets thrown around in newspapers, we see it on storylines, parents will use the term, professionals will use the term, but narrowing down what the behaviours are often can be difficult because for some reason there's a lot of definitions out there. So when I deliver training, I try and use the guidelines around self-harm to deliver that. So when I'm talking about self-harm, we're talking about self-poisoning and self-injury behaviours. So things like overdosing, a form of self-poisoning, on medications, and then self-injury, cutting, burning, scratching, hair pulling, head banging. They're the kind of behaviours that we're talking about when we say self-harm. People are quite surprised when I deliver training and give the definition of self-harm, especially parent groups, because it's often only seen as cutting and overdosing because of what's presented in the media. So acknowledging punching a wall or pulling your hair out is a form of self-harm. Can be quite surprising. Pinching, scratching yourself. When it comes to the common myths, I've called my business attention seekers for a reason. It's the most common myth I hear around self-harm. Oh, it's just attention-seeking behaviour. That's what often gets said. They're just attention-seeking. There's someone seeking attention, and that is so important that we provide that attention. We know, speaking generally about emotional distress, mental ill health, people struggle to communicate that. There's a lot of pressure in this country to use words. And I often laugh in training, I'm one of the gobbiest people you will ever meet. I've made a career out of talking. Yet, to this day, I struggle to talk about my emotions. I can tell you all about my life and how horrible it's been and describe instances, traumatic experiences. But if you ask me how they made me feel, I have a restricted vocabulary around that. And them same words, I could say it made me feel crap or bad. And people will use them same words to talk about going home and the milk's gone off. I'm thinking it doesn't quite measure up to the level of distress. Not saying it's competition, because that can be very distressing for someone. But I struggle to convey in words how it makes me feel. And self-harm, for the vast majority, is about conveying their emotional distress. It's a communication of emotional distress, and in the first instance to themselves. I think it's also important to remember it's not just teenagers who self-harm. 107 3 to 9-year-olds were admitted into hospital for self-harm in England in the year 2016 to 17. Older adults self-harm. And I think if we go with this misconception that it's a teenage epidemic, we're actually putting barriers in place for people to access support who are younger or older, because they might feel ashamed or embarrassed, or it might be like, oh no, you're too young to be doing that. So it gets missed until they hit teenage years. Or that it's a girl issue. That's a big myth, It's just girls, teenage girls, year 9 girls. Boys self-harm, male self-harm of all ages. But it gets missed because they might do something more commonly like punching a wall, which gets seen as anger, and gets a punitive response. Whereas they could be in the same level of distress, if I'm being stereotypical, as a girl who's cutting. But boys cut and burn and self-injure and self-poison all the same ways. But we know there's that male gender stereotype that is still in 2018 in a developed nation, stopping people from coming forward and seeking support. And I think the other big myth for me is this is just a cry for help. It's just a cry for help. And often around people who overdose on medications and don't die. And it's about someone's crying for help. I think the word just, it really grates with me. Just is so dismissive. Someone's just crying, someone's just got cancer, the just dismisses things. Someone's crying for help, someone's seeking attention, we should be giving them that help and attention, so they may have no other means of communicating their distress. And we have to also remember, as painful as this is, that the vast majority of people who self-harm do it on more than one occasion. And by the time they disclose their self-harm, they have been doing it for a period of time. So they've been trying to manage that distress. So how desperate must they be if now they've disclosed to someone?
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of thinking about how we might support somebody that's shared, or we found out that they've got behaviours in self-harming, my instinct is to think about not necessarily focusing on the self-harming behaviours, but maybe trying to look at the distress behind it. What sort of advice would you give to maybe a parent who's experiencing something similar and they're struggling on how to approach it with their child? What would be your advice to a parent?
I think the first thing is, remember, self-harm is a symptom of underlying distress for the vast majority. And I know I keep saying vast majority because we don't have accurate data for everyone. Self-harm is a symptom. Because what often happens is, and I get it, I'm a parent, parent finds out their child's self-harming, they feel at loss. They may not have any information, they're not being provided with any details, they've just either been told by a professional their child's self-harming, or their child's disclosed to them, or they've seen it. what I found is the autonomous response can very often be, I need to stop them. I need to stop them, because then that will make it better. But when we realise that self-harm is a symptom of underlying distress, and thereby the self-harm is a coping mechanism for that individual, if we focus upon stopping them, you're actually saying, I'm stopping you from coping. And we're not dealing with the underlying issue. Of course, we have to minimise risk, we have to reduce risk, but you can't eliminate risk. So having a spontaneous reaction of removing everything and trying to make it safe is virtually impossible. I've been in acute hospitals, as a patient, and even there I managed to find ways of hurting myself, because even though they removed what they thought was a risk to me, my distress hadn't been removed. If anything, had increased, because now I felt very out of control. And self-harm is about control, it's about distraction, it's about coping, it's about getting a release, it's about communicating distress to yourself in the first instance. So if suddenly that's all taken away from you, that person can become increasingly distressed. And I think the other thing is, the fear is that you find out your child's self-harming, again, the focus is upon stopping, because if we don't stop them, they're going to end up taking their own lives. And this self-harm leads to suicide. There is a relationship between the two. There is, that's a recognised relationship. People who self-harm are more likely to make an attempt on their own lives and die by suicide than someone who's never self-harmed. However, it's not a sole indicator of suicidal ideation, it's a vulnerability factor. And a lot of people who are self-harming are actually trying to keep alive, stay alive and keep going. And we know people who are suicidal, hopelessness has often set in. They don't see a future. So never assume someone is suicidal. How to support your child who is self-harming is firstly to be calm. And I know it's easier said than done, but having a very aggressive, angry response isn't because parents are horrible, it's because they're trying to protect their child. And they do that without realising the impact it can have. Shout, why are you doing this to yourself? Or why? Can make the child feel even worse. I failed you, I've let you down, I'm not good enough, which then can lead them to self-harm, because that sense of worthlessness, failure. So it's about reducing risk. Where you might have to remove objects, but know that you can't eliminate risk in the home. But you don't put them at undue risk. So if a child was overdosing, you're not going to leave them with medications, etc. But telling them that they can come to you if they're concerned about any injuries, if a child's cutting, for example, without getting a punitive response, because you want to keep your child as safe as possible. So it's important that they know they can come to you in case their self-harm did go deeper than anticipated. They did do a bigger burn than they thought they were. They don't want to hide away and put themselves at increased risk. That's another way of reducing risk. But it's about encouraging the child to seek support and encouraging the child to talk and ideally look at alternative coping strategies. I say that, then people go, okay, yep, I've heard about things like pinning an elastic band on their wrist, so I'm going to tell my child stop self-harming and here's an elastic band. It's not that simple. It's not about finding a like for like because there isn't one. It's about saying, okay, I hear you're in distress, because that's a message your child's giving you, that they're in distress. Not that they're self-harming, that they're in distress. Firstly, you want to keep them as safe as possible, reduce risk, provide any first aid or let them know where to get first aid from. And then it's about focusing upon the underlying issue, whilst giving them alternative techniques, but explaining what's behind them. So pinging an elastic band is about distraction, control. Also, it can be about self-punishment because it does hurt. And they're three of the functions of self-harm. And even if that child does that once, that's one less time they hurt themselves. There's excellent apps out there like Calm Harm that are aimed towards young people who are self-harming, very 2018, downloadable on your phone, very discreet. But also building in general well-being. When they're feeling down, what can they do? If it is academics, taking time out from schoolwork, having family time, making sure they're not being isolated. But I think one of the tough things is realising you can't force them to seek support. You cannot make them. Find out your child's self-harming, you want to make it better. You want to fix it. And that child might not be ready. In that moment, they might just want you to know, I'm struggling. Yeah. But you want to get them counselling, you want to get them this, and they're not ready for that. Appreciating that it might take some time, so it's about building up their trust and confidence to do that.
So thinking about life at school, what was life like for you at school, and do you think school supported you with your mental health?
100%. You know, I went to school in the 90s, secondary school, and there was no mental health first aid, no mental health training, awareness, nothing was really going on other than exam stress in year 11. But I, of course, was going through distress because of what was going on in my home life. And even though people weren't trained, school was my safe place, and I had teachers who I knew I could speak to when in distress. And without them, I don't think I'd be here today, and that's not an exaggeration. Pat Pilgrim and Sue Huck, namely, were the two phenomenal teachers. And for me, what that shows is that it starts off by being a person. Training adds, knowledge adds, but in the first instance, it was compassion. That's what I got from these teachers, and empathy and non-judgmental attitudes. And that's what got me through some very, very difficult times in my teenage years when I was battling with all the issues that were going on at home and trying to do that I'm fine, brave face at school. They were able to see through that. They picked up on it, and they were caring, and they listened. And that then set me up for when I was ready to access support. I had some positive experiences from adults to fall back on because I knew people could be good to me.
Yeah, that's really good. It's really nice to hear. And so with today, obviously, in the media, we keep talking about needing more training, more mental health education in schools. What do you think we need in schools? Obviously, you've had a very positive experience. So what do you think we need to be adding to the school curriculum, if you like, for our young people today?
As I said before, I think there is increasing pressure upon education staff to be managing young people's mental health, which some might say is a little bit unfair on them, but they do a phenomenal job in general in supporting young people. But to be able to maintain that job, they need funding, they need training. Perfect world, there's a counsellor in every school, counselling's available, but then we've got the issue, kids aren't at school every day. What happens at weekends? What happens with the long summer holidays and Christmas breaks? But for me, starting right from primary age, talking about emotional well-being, making mental health, mental ill health, conversations that we have. We can talk about emotions. It doesn't have to wait until they hit 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. Young people suffer from distress at all ages. It doesn't just start at secondary school. And often young people are supporting other young people because friends confide in friends. So we need to upskill everybody, and that comes with having a conversation. So whether that's PSHE sessions around emotions, mental health, well-being, how to support someone, active listening skills, importance of disclosing if you're concerned about a friend, who to disclose to, making it normal, normalising the conversation, alongside having sessions for staff, helping them see just the basics around mental health so they better understand it. So if they do spot something, they feel equipped to deal with it, just in that first instance. And then encouraging parents to attend awareness sessions, whether it's around specific topics like mine, like self-harm, anxiety, depression, or just general mental health and how it's impacting upon young people, what they should be looking out for, if it did happen to them, how they should respond to it, or if their child comes back and says, I'm concerned about my friend, what do I do? They feel able to give them a positive response.
So let's talk a little bit more about recovery in mental health. And obviously you've mentioned that you've had your own experience of mental ill health. So tell us about your recovery and what you think recovery means.
I think recovery means different things to different people. People often say to me, "Are you recovered? Are you better now?" I'm like, well, what does that mean? And often for what it means for people is, do you still self-harm? That's what they're actually asking. And then I struggle to answer that question. Do I still self-harm? If that's how my recovery is going to be measured, I can't say yes or no to that. I can say to you, I have not self-harmed for just over 2 years. I can say that. Does that mean I've recovered? For me, yes. Because I was self-harming at one stage on a daily basis and at any crisis that occurred. But I haven't self-harmed for 2 years, and I've had crises in between, but I didn't turn to self-harm. Have I recovered? I'm not on medication, so for me, that's a positive step. Have I recovered? I've not been in hospital for a number of years, so for me, that's a positive step. Do I feel recovered? Yeah. You know, I'm able to deliver training and talk about very difficult topics without having the urge to self-harm or locking myself away in a room and isolating myself afterwards because it's brought up distressing memories. So I feel recovered in that sense. I feel recovered because I'm able to hold down a job. I was able to go to university. I am able to go out and socialise with friends, but at the same time also stay at home by choice. So that makes me feel recovered. But then I look at a very different journey. And my daughter was very ill a couple of years ago, and she actually got sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So for parents listening, I know what it's like to have a child who is struggling with mental ill health. My journey for recovery, I'm now 36, started, I would say, when I was 24 years old. I engaged with services from the age of 19, but I didn't fully engage. Engaging for me was turning up. I wasn't ready to talk about my issues. At 24, when I did start engaging, my life turned around within 3 years. And for me, that meant coming off medication, you know, working, getting a degree, etc. But I waited a long time. And maybe that's because the support wasn't available to what it is now. 2.5 years ago, my daughter was in an acute psychiatric unit. She only got discharged last February. I look at her now, she's still on medication. She still has some bad days, but she's at where any other 17-year-old, well, her peers are, which is at sixth form, quite irritating at times. Yeah, she does all the average teenage things, from parties to studying to asking for things, and her recovery is ongoing. But I think everyone's recovery is ongoing. She's better than what she was, but she's still not who she was at the beginning before it all happened. But I think that's part of mental health. It's not about going back to who you were. For a lot of people, it's something they will battle with for the rest of their lives. And it's about managing. So for me, recovery is about managing. I'm managing my mental health, and my daughter is managing her mental health. Even though we're in very different places, we manage it very differently. It's not she hasn't recovered because she's still taking medication. She hasn't recovered because she still sees a psychiatrist or a counsellor. That doesn't mean she hasn't recovered. She is able to attend school. She's able to socialise with her friends. She's able to do her work. She's able to go to a job. She's able to go to festivals. So she's able to live the life she wants to live. And I think that's what recovery is about. It shouldn't be measured by not taking medication or not receiving therapy or not self-harming or not having suicidal thoughts and not having bad days. It's about how we come through that, to me, shows what recovery is.
What would you say to a young person, because obviously the themes around young people, I know obviously it's not just young people that self-harm, but for a young person that's currently in distress and is choosing to self-harm to cope, what would you say to them?
What I'd say to any young person is, if they're struggling with emotions, they're in emotional distress, whether they're self-harming or not, it's really important to seek support. And I know that's easy, you know, I'm fresh and say, oh, seek support, go talk to someone. And it grates on kids, you know, because they'll look at all the barriers that stops them doing that. I don't want to be judged, I'm scared, I'm embarrassed, my parents are going to be upset, someone might get into trouble, I'm going to get kicked out of school, my friends won't like me anymore. So I can see why simply saying go and talk to someone isn't that easy. But what I will say is, when I was younger, back in the day before the internet, I was limited to the support that was available. It was real people or Childline or Samaritans, whereas now in 2018, if you don't feel comfortable talking to someone face to face at school, at home, for whatever reason, there are a myriad of websites that are available, safe websites, moderated websites that can provide up-to-date advice that is relevant to you as a young person. If you're concerned about a friend, there are helplines that are available that are fully confidential that you can call if you're concerned about yourself or somebody else, or you just want to have a rant without any consequences. And it's about not feeling alone. You know, the support is now available. Social media always gets, you know, shouted at in, you know, hey, it's bad, it's negative, but it can be a really big positive. The apps that are out there, the websites that are out there, if you know where to go.
Yeah.
So don't feel alone. The support is there when you are ready to accept it and know things can get better. And I know, again, that's easier said. I know if someone said that to me when I was ill, I wasn't having any of it. But I had to take that step to engage with support. And it was hard. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And I've gone through quite a lot in my life. Accepting support was hard because it makes it very real. But once you take that first step, you can come through whatever the distress is in your life. And you can live the life that you want. These were my goals in life, to get a degree, house, car. I've achieved them. I look at my daughter now, her goals are to go to university, but she realised the only way she could get there was by engaging with the support. She didn't enjoy it, but now she has. She's seen that it doesn't hold her back. Mental ill health does not need to hold you back. It's not who you are. It's not your story. It may be part of your story. It may shape you in the future, shape me, the way I speak to people, my understanding. It shaped my daughter in the same way, but not in a bad way.